Sachsenhausen concentration camp, north of Berlin. The workshop is silent, except for the tick of a clock and the click of loop on lens. A man in a striped uniform, once a master printer in Vienna, holds his breath as he lifts a sheet to the light. Across the paper, a monarch stares back with cool authority, the crown profile of a British queen engraved in lines as fine as hair. The ink sits in the fibres exactly as it should. The watermark ripples with the same ghostly crown. The serial numbers sing in the right font, the right rhythm. After months of failure, bruised fingers and beatings, the workshop has done the impossible. It has made a British banknote that Britain itself might accept. The SS officer supervising the room lets the silence linger, then smiles like a man who has found a new weapon. This is the heart of Operation Bernhard, Hitler's clandestine plan to counterfeit the pound sterling on an industrial scale, to flood the world with false money until the British economy chokes. If bombs cannot break the city of London, perhaps paper can. And if paper can be made to look and behave like the Bank of England's own, then money can be turned against the people who trust it. It is a strange unit, this workshop of prisoners and presses. It sits inside a camp that survives on hunger and terror, yet its labourers are fed better than most. They are bookbinders, typographers, paper makers, engravers, the rare inmates whose hands can turn craft into war. Their guards need them alive and dexterous, but not proud. Every success buys them another week of special rations. Every error could send them to the other side of the fence, where work means gravel and death. The deal is clear. Perfect the world's most secure banknote, or die trying. Outside, Germany in 1942 is changing shape. Tanks are still pushing in the east, but the fuel is thinner, the skies more dangerous. The Reich needs new forms of power, ones that don't run on oil. Money can move without gasoline. Money can recruit agents, grease borders, and buy the silence of men who swear they cannot be bought. With the right paper, the right watermarks, the right tiny imperfections copied exactly, a forged note can pass 90 times out of 100. 90 is enough to buy a war. The first perfect pound is the beginning of a story that will cross continents and dive under a lake in the Austrian Alps. It will travel in the briefcases of spies, change hands in smoky Lisbon banks, and finance operations the Reich cannot admit exist. And when the war ends, it will not end cleanly. Crates will be thrown into cold water that remembers everything. Divers will search. Police will count. Collectors will whisper. A queen's face will keep breaking the surface of history, as bright and false as the day it left a press in a camp where the clock ticked and men held their breath. The Bank of England's paper is not paper, the way a newspaper is paper. It is texture and pedigree, rag and linen, not wood pulp, torn from a supply chain that begins with shreds of shirts and account books and ends in a vat that knows one recipe only. To counterfeit the pound note, the prisoners in Sachsenhausen must build that recipe from absence. They begin with fibres. Under microscopes, the paper makers count the lengths and diameters, the frayed ends, the odd tiny lump that repeats across genuine samples. They steam, beat, and wash rags pilfered from every depot the SS can reach, hunting for a softness that isn't softness at all but memory. The way real notes crease and then uncrease, the lazy spring back to flatness that a cashier's fingers feel without thinking. Watermarking becomes a second religion. The crown, the letters, the flowing lines that are not printed, but born inside the sheet. These must be coaxed into existence by dandy rolls and wire patterns, copied wire by wire. too sharp, and the mark looks theatrical. Too vague, and it looks sick. The solution is patience and failure, and another night's work. The vat man dips the mold in with a motion that is part ritual, part prayer. Then there is the color with no name, a pale warmth just on the edge of cream. Pigments are measured in grams lighter than a sigh. The foreman of the unit, a printer who once lectured on inks in Vienna, keeps a notebook where colors are described as weather. Dawn, wet parchment, the inside of a loaf. He knows the bank stock by touch on the back of his hand. He makes the SS wait. When the first batch dries, the men pass sheets from palm to palm. They listen to the crackle. They lift to the light. In the fibers, the watermark swims like a memory. In the paper's sound, there is a kind of ring. Not perfect, but closer. Outside, the winter turns on its hinge. Inside, a handful of experts rebuild an island they will never see, one sheet at a time. A banknote is not only paper and ink. It is also a regiment of numbers, marching in patterns the public cannot see. Serials, check digits, issue letters. An invisible fence meant to pen in forgers. If the paper fools the fingers, the numbers must fool the ledgers. The team's mathematician, a school teacher from Prague with a cough that never leaves him, takes charge of the serial problem. He gathers genuine notes from black markets and intelligence seizures, lists them on butcher paper, and begins to draw lines. Where do the letters jump? How often does a block repeat? What numbers never appear together? He plays the Bank of England's habits like a piano. Patterns emerge. Series that look random reveal a cadence. Issue codes that once seemed arbitrary step neatly if you stand far enough back. He teaches the others rules with phrases they can remember even when the generator rattles the windows. E comes after G, but never after K in this run. Even, odd, odd, even. Mind the skip at the 1,000. A note that cannot be folded into a sequence is a note that will trip an audit, ruin a courier, get a man killed. The typographers face their own sorcery. The digits aren't merely shapes. They are scars left by metal swords honed and bruised over decades. They examine the ink spread at 200x and carve new punches until a 3 has the right mean streak and a 7 leans at the bank's particular angle. When the first serials strike the sheet, the men read them aloud like liturgy. Somewhere, far away, a clerk in London would not look twice. That is victory. To finish the illusion, they mimic wear. New notes are suspicious. Notes with a day's work on them are honest. Bundles are flexed by hand, edges dulled. A touch of grime rubbed into the fold by thumbs cleaned on aprons stained with real ink. The numbers look right. The paper feels right. Now the lies can travel. Neutral on paper, electric in practice. Lisbon is wartime's clearinghouse, where refugees, spies, and currencies switch trains. If the forged pounds can breathe here, they can breathe anywhere. A courier in a decent suit carries an envelope and a story. An export deal, a ship to charter, a watch to buy. He meets a banker who pretends to be incurious, a cashier who is not paid to pretend, and a black market broker who knows the smell of fear. Notes change hands in a small room with a fan that clicks and a window that will not open. The cashier counts with a rhythm learned over years. Tap, slide, fan, lift to light. Paper makes a particular whisper. Watermark swims. Serials march. The broker watches the cashier, not the notes. There is a pause that lasts the length of a cigarette. The cashier nods, mutters a rate, and rings a bell. The first stack of Bernhard pounds has crossed the border of doubt. They buy tungsten in one deal, a passport in another, a piece of silence in a third. They fog the glass of numbers in a dozen ledgers. Money has done what money does, move. A British agent, seated 2 cafes away, notes the courier's too eager pocketing and the way he avoids the pavement where a policeman stands. He cannot prove the notes are wrong. He can only write that something feels off, too many crisp pounds in a month when the sea is dangerous. The report goes to a file. The file grows teeth later. Back in Sachsenhausen, word returns, encoded in smiles and extra bread. They passed. The workshop does not celebrate. They tighten their processes. Perfection is a room with no furniture. The presses run until the bearings complain. Outside, the snow melts, and the camp smells like earth again. Inside, a kingdom of paper extends itself by a few more miles. Once the notes are proven, they are fed into veins the Reich prefers to deny it has. Intelligence chiefs argue over shares. SS men sign out bundles as if they were carbines. A suitcase of pounds can build a network faster than ideology and maintain it longer than threats. Agents in Athens find that landlords prefer sterling to promises. A saboteur in Cairo buys car parts without a question asked. In Rome, a fence moves diamonds that once sat on a Dutch breakfast table, and the pounds settle the differences between the men counting. A courier in the Balkans turns counterfeit into real. Pounds for gold Napoleons, gold for ammunition, ammunition for the right to move through a valley at night. But every payout leaves a wake. When too many British notes appear in the wrong streets, the Secret Service tilts its head. Bank of England clerks compare deposits from far-flung branches and feel a thread of wrongness in their fingers. The numbers add up, too well. Even perfection, scaled, becomes a signature. Inside the camp, the men understand the trap closing around them. If the operation must die to preserve its secret, they will die with it. They barter for minutes with excellence. They fix a tiny misregistration on plate 14, align the dandy roll teeth by touch, squeeze one more month of plausibility from a blade. They live in the margins of tolerances, under the mathematics of other men's wars. Some nights, the foreman runs his fingers over a real note kept hidden for prayer. He thinks of London shopgirls, of the smell of coal on a bus route, of coins ringing in change trays. He wonders if anyone can ever trust money again, if they knew how easily it became a weapon. Then he sleeps, because morning has a list and a quota and a clock. What began as a workshop becomes a factory. New presses arrive, flatbeds, rollers, guillotines. The SS calls them special units and tells Berlin the work is industrial documentation. Each month, the print count doubles. The air thickens with paper dust and steam. Noise drowns thought. The camp's printers refine every process. They match batch to batch so that a note printed in March looks identical to one from December. They invent small inconsistencies, a slight offset, a smudge, because perfection, ironically, is suspicious. Bundles leave under cover of night in trucks that smell faintly of ink and fear. As output grows, the operation draws attention. Bureaucrats want figures, generals want results. Yet secrecy forbids acknowledgement. In reports, the unit is listed as special security paper production. The men joke they are minting ghosts. By 1944, millions of forged pounds circulate through occupied Europe. SS agents buy goodwill, weapons, and escape routes. Bernhard's bills fund sabotage in Cairo, deception in Spain, and quiet retirement plans for men who will never see a Nuremberg dock. But the math turns sour, paper stores thin, ink grows scarce, the presses cough up heat instead of progress. Rumours whisper that the Allies know, that Scotland Yard smells counterfeit thunder in the distance. When a real Bank of England clerk in London discovers duplicate serials from different banks, alarm bells begin to ring quietly in the corridors of Whitehall. Inside the camp, the presses keep running. For the men, every note printed is another heartbeat, proof that they are still useful, still alive. They have built a machine that cannot stop without crushing its own operators. London, spring 1944. Bank inspectors unbox notes from branches across Britain and find the impossible. Twins. Identical serial numbers stamped on bills that arrived months apart. The Bank of England, custodian of global trust, realizes it has been infiltrated not by thieves but by perfection. Meetings are held behind locked doors. Scotland Yard forms a discreet task force. Agents track the paths of suspect currency through Lisbon, Istanbul, and Cairo. Every lead ends in fog. The forgeries are too good. Some of the counterfeit even returns to the bank's vaults, swapped unknowingly for the genuine by commerce itself. The Germans know discovery is near. Bernhard Krüger, the SS major overseeing the operation, orders production shifted. Soon they will counterfeit not just pounds, but US dollars. Smaller scale, but for post-war leverage. The prisoners feel the tremor of change. They sense that exposure means liquidation. In late 1944, Allied bombers shatter German logistics. Deliveries of cotton and ink cease. The men hear gunfire closer each night. Guards grow nervous, rations tighten. Orders come to prepare for relocation, destination undisclosed. The presses fall silent, paper half-dried on lines. For the first time in years, the room is quiet enough to hear breathing. They are loaded into trucks with crates of finished notes and shipped south, through forests smelling of pine and defeat. Some think they are being spared. Others think this is the end. No one asks aloud which is worse. Salzkammergut, Austria, April 1945. The mountains are blue with snowmelt, the lake still cold as glass. The trucks grind up the road to Lake Toplitz, engines misfiring under too much weight. Inside, sealed wooden crates thud like coffins. Orders, destroy the evidence. The SS detail hauls the boxes to the water's edge, pries them open just enough to let air escape, and pushes them into the depths. The lake takes them without a ripple. Within hours, millions of pounds sink to the bottom, banknotes swelling, ink bleeding in the dark. The perfect currency dissolves into pulp. The prisoners, still alive, are taken to Redl-Zipf, another secret site meant for rocket testing, then freed by advancing Americans weeks later. They tell their story in fragments, paper, presses, watermarks, but few believe them. Who would imagine a fortune at the bottom of a lake? When the war ends, Austria becomes a patchwork of occupation zones. Locals whisper of divers and treasure hunters. Some find soggy stacks wedged between rocks, fish darting through folds of the king's portrait. Others find nothing but silt. The legend of Operation Bernhard becomes part of the Alps folklore, half history, half ghost story. For Krüger, capture brings irony. He defends himself by saying he kept his printers alive, that he valued skill over cruelty. The court notes it without comment. The lake keeps its own counsel. In the years after victory, pieces of Bernhard resurface. British investigators, trace counterfeit notes appearing in Swiss banks and Cairo bazaars. A diver in 1959 brings up a crate from Lake Toplitz. Inside, paper blooms into mush, but the cereals are unmistakable. The myth is real. Collectors begin to hunt surviving examples. Each intact note becomes both artifact and crime, a relic of perfection made in captivity. Museums quietly acquire samples stamped specimen forgery. Bank historians study them to understand not just the deception, but the craftsmanship. The forger's unwilling collaboration turned into art. For the men who made them, freedom is uneasy. Some rebuild lives in print shops, others emigrate. A few vanish into the grey zones of Cold War intelligence. When asked later why they worked so hard for their captors, one replies, "Because the paper was all we had." By the 1980s, divers still comb Toplitz. They find counterfeit pounds, Nazi documents, even crates of film reels. The lake remains treacherous. Mud thick as glue, tree trunks reaching up like arms. No one knows how much is still down there, or whether it matters. The real weight of Operation Bernhard is not measured in pounds, but in paradox. The finest counterfeits ever made, printed by men who no longer believed in money at all. Trust is the quiet engine of a currency. It hums underneath markets and marriages, groceries and wages. Operation Bernhard set out to jam that engine with a counterfeit so perfect that clerks, bankers, and black market brokers would not notice until it was too late. In a camp built for death, prisoners made the most convincing lies money had ever seen, and in doing so, they bought themselves time to live. In London, the bank did not collapse. It bent, investigated, adapted. Serial ranges were retired, notes were withdrawn, procedures hardened. The British public did not learn, not then, how close a fiction had come to buying reality. After the war, the legend focused on the lake, on crates sunk in mountain water, on divers surfacing with soggy crowns. But the real story was smaller and larger at once. Hands, skill, and the fragile confidence that knits a society together. Some of the Sachsenhausen printers later told interviewers they worked slowly. When the SS demanded new American dollars, sabotage by precision. Some said their craft kept them from breaking. All agreed the paper taught them something, that value is a promise, and that a promise can be kept by men who never chose the cause they served. When a forged note passes, it buys an hour. When trust passes, it buys a century. At Lake Toplitz, the trout still circle above silt and timber and history. The crates that remain, if they remain, are museum pieces now, their threat dissolved. What endures is the question the operation asked and failed to answer. How much of a nation's strength lives in ink, and how much in the people willing to believe it? The presses are silent. The notes are relics. The lesson keeps paying out.